Excellent. Thanks everyone for joining the June 11th, 2022 Zero Tolerance Club meeting. Fantastic. I just want to go through a couple of things real quick before we get to our guest who hopefully jumps on. Otherwise, the meeting is going to be pretty short. And feel free to ask any questions anytime, yada, yada, yada. But the one big thing that I wanted to go through is the updates on the club party that we're planning for the end of July, July 31st. Sunday, July 31st, and it's going to be something that starts around noonish if you're doing the brew that we're doing, or later on if you're coming later than that. It's going to be at Mutantis Brewing, which is in Portland, and it's kind of a private party, so it's not going to be the Mutantis is actually going to close down as a private party, so you have to kind of have it as an invite-only situation. And so please RSVP if you're going to go. There's an event that I set up on the Facebook page if you are so inclined to join us there. Let's see, some of the things I wanted to mention. Well, all that, since you have a short time to be here, what do you want to discuss? I'll leave the floor to you for a second.
Sure. Yeah. So I think you covered some of the basics. July 31st, and then we know we've got a bunch of club members coming. We've also, of course, opened it up to the gluten-free breweries across North America. So we're still getting some RSVPs from those folks. I know we've got a good showing from the Portland area breweries. So like Groundbreaker and Beerly, Shrimp. Of course, Mutantis will be there. But we've got, I think we've also got some folks coming from outside of Oregon. And if they can't make it, I know we've got some people sending us some beer, which is fantastic. So we may have beer as far away from Vermont, Quebec, and not Glutenberg. But who else? Ghostfish this is spectacular, actually. I'm really excited about this. Ghostfish is talking about doing a zero tolerance anniversary brew for us. Nice. That we can and send down. So we're excited to do that. I think there's a good chance we're going to have Grouse and Eckert Malt representatives there. So Jim Eckert, sounds like he's going to be there. We might get Twyla or one of the other folks from Grouse. Geez, I'm trying to think. Oh, Gluten Free Home Brewing. They're going to be coming, and they're going to have a tent. And if you're going and if you want to get your grains, they've kindly offered to bring grains with them that you've ordered. So that's another thing to think about. We might also have some swag from different people. Novozymes, who, Ondia Pro and Ceramix Flex are kind of the key go-to enzymes for us these days. And we've had a pretty good relationship with those guys, and they're pretty plugged in. And while they may or may not be there, they are talking about sending some goodies along for us. So you might not want to miss that. And of course, I think, Kale, you're working on some t-shirts. I think that would be one other exciting thing to show.
I am, yeah. Let me actually just real quick, since I haven't shared this yet, do a sneak peek. Let me see if I can do. It'll let me do this. Oh man, now it's telling me I gotta open my system preferences. That sucks. Of course.
We've got time. The speaker isn't here yet, so I think you'll be all right.
Let me see if I can figure this.
Print it out and hold it up.
Yeah.
Privacy security.
Yeah, where's the kid in the background modeling it? We should have.
Yeah, I know. Well, I might have to share that on the Facebook page because I don't know what the heck's going on. Oh, wait. Hold on. Here we go. Hold on. It's got to I'm locked down. I'm on security mode here. Hold on.
Out that way.
It's great. That'd be awesome.
Cool.
Yeah,
I'm sure people would love to see some.
maybe some swag. You know,
Yeah, that's great.
Nice.
gotta have some swag.
I'm hoping to make it out, Brian. That'd be awesome. That'd be awesome.
Oh, flights are so expensive. It's painful.
All right, I think I got this working now. So can you guys see my screen?
Oh yeah,
Yeah. Okay, cool.
I can see you, but not your screen.
Oh, you can't see. Oh, hold on. I gotta actually click the share button. Hold on. I'm having some technology problems. Thank you. Okay. Now can you see my screen?
Yes.
Miller time.
Millet.
Oh, millet time.
It's millet time. Yeah. So yeah, we're gonna do some new t-shirts, and it's kind of TBD on a bunch of things and logistics, but there's a place down in Portland that can print t-shirts for us, and it's kind of been like a little bit of a club fundraiser. We'll see what the costs look like. Then one of the biggest costs for the t-shirts is, of course, shipping it. So if we don't have to ship it, if people can pick them up and so on and so forth, then that would be great. So it's primarily going to be for people in the US and then Canada. For the Canada ones, last time the t-shirts cost like a ton of money to ship to Canada, to be perfectly honest with you. So I think if stewards, if we know in advance of people that are in Canada that want them, then it'd probably be best if we can work something out where we can have you take those back up and then ship them out or something like that. I'm not sure what that looks like.
I'll open up my own little Etsy shop or something just for this.
Yoo-hoo.
Yeah.
I like the design though. It's cool.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you. And what else? Oh, so I don't know if you mentioned this. The day before was something where I was thinking that if people are really super interested, that I'm going to go down to McMinnville on the Saturday before and go down to Beerly Brewing, and I was just IMing with JP, and he said, oh, that's great. That the one thing to note about that is that for seating inside the tap room, they have a vaccination requirement. So you have to have a max and you have to show proof of vaccination. So can take that into consideration if you do decide to go down and join us down there. But I thought that was a fun thing we could do as like a weekend thing if you're like super into it, right?
I'm coming down Friday, so.
Oh, okay, nice. Well, then you're like way more into it than all of us. That's awesome. Are you
Well,
gonna
I'm bringing
be?
my wife down too, so we're gonna make a little mini holiday out of it.
Nice.
Okay. Are you gonna be in McMinnville on Saturday or?
Yeah, well, if I'll just get some information from you on it. I'm driving right now, so if you can
Okay.
message me or whatever, and I'll see about coming.
Cool.
Okay.
Just gotta find an expensive hotel to stay in.
Yeah. As what was the other thing? So the day of the actual party, we were gonna try to do a group brew, and this is very, free flowing. I think. I believe that there's like a Brewzilla or something like that Jason has down there to use. And we were going to start that not super early. I think last time at Groundbreaker. So last time we had a party was 2019. And our guest actually was kind of the leader of the homebrew, which I actually don't know what the hell happened to that homebrew. So, I mean, what we're going to do this time is not start so early. We're going to start at noon, so it's not such a long day for people. So it's going to flow into the party, probably, is what we're thinking, and then people can come and go as they see fit. With that brew, we're not going to probably package it up or like send it out to people. We're just gonna let Jason serve it in the tap room. So it just seemed like kind of a logistical nightmare to do anything like that from our previous experience. So
That and then he'll supply the ingredients. We don't have to worry about that.
oh right, yeah. So then we get free ingredients, so that's cool as well. Oh, and then the swag stuff, we were thinking about doing some sort of raffle thing. I don't know what that's gonna look like, but that's kind of TBD, but it's gonna be a lot of fun. So the most important part is there's gonna be a shit ton of beer there and we're all gonna have a lot of fun, right? So don't worry about all that other stuff. Just show up, have fun. We would love to see everyone. So we want to get a good group there. There's plenty of space. Stuart, you've been down there. Can you tell us about the
Well, yeah, it's a great space. Kim, you've seen it too, of course. But yeah, they've got of course, they've got a nice tap room area inside the building and plenty of room to mingle in there. But also, there's a nice big patio outside. So
Yeah.
weather permitting, end of June or July, it should be good. There's a Mexican place next door that has awesome tamales. I've tried those and it's great. Yeah, it's fantastic. So you're covered for gluten-free food and obviously gluten-free beer that people will hopefully bring. And we've got some breweries sending beer, as I said. So it's gonna be a great event. Looking forward to seeing as many people there as possible. You can but again, just let us know. We do need to put people officially on an invite list to make this a private party. But beyond that, it is a fairly open event, so you don't
need a red carpet going in the door.
There we go. Yeah, a little photo op, paparazzi. Yeah.
Sure, you wear your Gucci.
Yeah, right.
Nike maybe, but no Gucci.
If I make it out there, I will definitely be looking for couches to serve and people to hang out with and drive me around to places.
yeah.
Like every gluten-free brewery we can hit. Let's do it.
A few options there.
Yeah, there is.
I will pay you with hops and malt.
Nice. Okay, so I was gonna go through some other stuff, but since we're already like 20 minutes in, let's skip all that stuff, I think.
I am here now in case you didn't get my chat.
Thank you for joining. I see you there. You have an excellent shirt on. I love your background.
Right.
Hey, Bob.
Reppin'. What's up?
Oh, Bob.
What's up, Bob?
So before we get started with Bob, Stuart and Kim actually have been helping out with coordinating the party. So thank you so much for that. They've been really helping out a lot, and we're working as a team to try to make it happen. Either Kim, Stuart, is there anything else you want to mention about the party?
Hi, Dee Dee.
I think you
A
probably
lot
covered.
of the people I've talked to have been very generous in supplying both beer and raffle items, so it should be cool.
Yeah. Big
Yep.
shout out to all the breweries that are engaged, and not everybody can be there, of course, but yeah, lots of great generosity. So thank you.
Excellent. All right.
I'll have to figure out if anybody's coming. Like, I'm curious if DC, or I call him Dave now. I'm curious if he's going, because I'd send him up with, it's better to send it than to mail it, really.
Yeah, let us
And
know.
more, I can send more that way.
More beer is always better, right?
Truth.
Yeah.
What's up, Bob? Let's go.
Okay, all right, so let's go. So thank you so much. So I wrote this little ditty, so I have to say it. So you guys are have to bear with me. So hailing from the dedicated gluten-free brewing wasteland known as Southern California. He's been an active member in the club for the life of the Zero Tolerance Homebrew Club, and now the head brewer and co-owner of Divine Science Brewing in Tustin, California. He is the master of millet the Sultan of Simcoe, the
Whoa.
Wizard of Warm Fermented Weinstoffen, Mr. Bob Keifer. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Cheers,
Nice.
everybody.
Oh.
Thanks for having me.
And so the reason Bob is here is because in his background you see I think the shot of the cover of his new upcoming book, and the book is titled Gluten Free Brewing, correct?
Gluten Free Brewing. Yeah, let's just keep it simple.
And so can you just give us a real basic information about the nuts and bolts of things, like when's it release, where is it going to be available, all that kind of good stuff?
Yeah, I mean, it did get pushed back. There was a lot of stuff that kind of came like rushing in towards the end, and I had to advocate really hard with the editors, the team, the marketing staff, just to say, hey, I think this stuff is important enough that we should push the date back. Some of that was tests and trials that we did. We're actually, I really did more of a high level synopsis because we didn't have time to have it peer reviewed, but that will hopefully lead to grant work, right? So the release date is looking like it'll be sometime in late September. That's if everything goes well and all the ink supplies and all the other printing supplies are there and on time. And based on my meeting recently with Brewers Publications, they will be beginning the marketing efforts very soon. I have gone into my local homebrew store and they go, wait, you're writing a book? Because they know me personally, and they're just on those kind of forums and whatnot. So it's like, yeah, no, you'll probably be hearing more about it soon. So.
And tell us about availability. Actually, I'm going to share my screen to show people like what I'm talking about. So
for sure.
This is just a share of the Brewers Publications websites. And if you go in there, it's one of the upcoming under books. And you can see that it says when it's available, supposedly September 26th, coming soon. And then it's got availability on all these locations. And I think some of these locations, correct me if I'm wrong, Bob, if you go to Amazon, or I don't know who you prefer, you can actually go in and pre-order and pay for it and get it all set and ready to go, right?
Yeah, I mean, whichever forum you prefer best, honestly, is going to be a good way. Some people like the feeling of the actual book in the hand, and some people like to have that on the shelf, but that's not even that important to me because you can access it on virtual books like Kindle. So yeah, whichever way you go for it. I mean, I first saw it on Amazon, and I'm imagining that's just because of Amazon's SEO skills. So I think you can buy it directly from Brewers Publications, which is, I think, the best way, but it's the same price in either form. So it's really no impact to the customer. So like I said, whatever you prefer and whatever you're most comfortable supporting. You know what I mean? There's so many people that went into making this book, right? This really isn't about making money. This is really about spreading the word and really, sharing some of the, like it says, the techniques and processes that I've not only learned myself through trial and error, but these are all from the Gluten Free Brewing community. I think that's something that really grounds me to a certain extent in this endeavor, is the fact of how much of a community effort it really has been, from the free and lengthy discussions that we get on in the various forums that we share, right? Hey, what do you guys think about this? Hey, this happened. How do you explain that? And that's really kind of where I've been reading through those and have reread through those over the past couple of years, just to try to get a better idea of what the community is saying. So, this book is partially written from my whimsical way of using words, but it really is a synthesis of everybody's collective knowledge. So I hope that will not only inspire people, but also potentially bring that smile to their face, knowing that, hey, wait, I remember that discussion. I remember, I was there. I might have been the person who asked that question. You know what I mean? And I think that's something that's really special to me about this book.
is it, I know that like on the Facebook page, and if anyone else has other questions, I have a bunch of questions I wrote down, so that's why
Cool.
I'll just go. But if anyone else has any questions, feel free to jump in. But just from like what you just said, I feel like one of the big problems with Facebook as a medium for like the homebrew club and like from a knowledge perspective is that, things are really hard to kind of find that like you're like, oh, well, we had this really great conversation about like TEF, right? Then it's like,
Yeah,
oh, it's like way down in, you could probably search it and find it, or Stuart has a good way of linking those threads into the wiki, right? But oftentimes things kind of get just disappear into the ether, right? So
right.
it sounds like that in part of writing this book, you were trying to capture a lot of those really important moments and then put it into a form where you have a kind of like a good resource that's always there. You can flip to a certain page and say, hey,
Yeah, there is a lot of organization that went into it. I think that I'd like to give a big shout out at this point specifically to Alan Winhouse from Holidaily, who was the Brewers Association technical editor on this book. Because I will say very honestly that the first editions, if you will, the first edits
oh, the
of
draft,
certain chapters,
yeah.
yes, was literally verbal vomit. And so wrangling all of that actually back into a coherent storyline and argument, and and it was gentle nudges too. So I'd like to also really appreciate the tact that Alan has and his ability to go, hey, this seems counterintuitive, or hey, I'm not sure where this is leading to. Can you maybe get to that a little bit sooner and then describe it? Which is also a recommendation that John Palmer gave me on the outset of this book, is to really start to organize thoughts from a standpoint of say this thing and then really get into it. And I was just reading through the copy, and on 8.5 by 11, I think is the format that I was reading it in. This sucker is almost 200 pages. So depending on the size of the book, this could be a pretty thick one. Like the actual dimensions.
Wow. I'll go again. So you mentioned John Palmer, and I had a question actually about like, so there's a lot of these classic books that it's like when I started brewing, it's like, oh, you should buy How to Brew by John Palmer and The Complete Joy of Home Brewing, Charlie Papazian, and and then you have to take that and kind of um use the majority of it, and then there's certain things like, oh, hey, your mashing and your grains and all that stuff is completely different for what the brewing we're doing. So there's like a lot of it that's like standard operating procedure, and then there's some other stuff where it's like they're not talking about anything we're using from a malt perspective or anything like that. So how did you balance like, you know, taking a book and not having it fall into, hey, this is just another how to brew, but still pointing out the similarities and differences between gluten-free brewing and traditional brewing?
Yeah, I mean, I can kind of call back to, one of my first interactions with the overall copy editor, whose name is, I believe, Ian or Ian. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. At the same point, because we really actually never spoke via phone. It was all via like Dropbox and Word on the web. And so, he said very early on, there is not enough time in this book for this to be a 101 brewing. So, and that is really the focus that I took, specifically because, like during the first technical edit, Alan was like, this needs to be defined, this needs to be defined, this needs to be defined. And I was like, you're right, but I don't know if I have the time, energy, and or like ability to actually really get down into it, because a lot of those are already kind of codified, right? A lot of this is kind of public domain, not just from the previous brewing books, as you mentioned, but various forums, Homebrew Talk, the Brewers Association specifically. But but it also I really did chose to show that divergence in brewing style very specifically. I think that there also is one of the things that I really liked about some of the editing is that there is specific page references to callbacks, right? So that if you say want to skip ahead, some people do that. Some people go right to the recipe section. I totally get it. It'll have a callback to the reference of what to do from which page. We like say we talk about the low to high, right? There's I think 4 or 5 different brewing methods specifically that are referenced in the recipe section, like a perform a low to high rising step mash, or perform a high to low, falling step mash, right? So, and then it goes, refer to this chapter on this page, right? So that sort of thing, because that is something where you go, okay, wait, why am I doing that? What am I trying to elicit from the grains? Why is that important to me, right? And I do really through the course of doing this book, or just really sitting down and kind of actually breaking it down and having that discussion, not just with myself, but also since there are people editing it, they weigh in, right? And I really love the questions that Ian would ask, which are like, oh, wait, what? A ferulic acid rest, how is that relevant, right? What do you even need to do that if there's not wheat in the mix? And you're like, great question. Give me a week. And then I would literally just like read through research paper after research paper of like ferulic acid and gluten-free grains, right? And or like, oh, I couldn't find that one. So I'm like, all right, ferulic acid in this grain. Okay, can't find it. This grain, right? And just like literally change my Google search till I found like research papers on like, oh, hey, wouldn't you know it? Corn has a higher ferulic acid content than wheat. Maybe there is something to it. But would you perform a 108 degree Fahrenheit rest with it? Because the study itself talks about cooking it, right? Just like you almost would it in a falling step mash, right? So it's like, okay, we're literally just scratching the surface on this book, right? And that's where we also got into this conversation of, do we actually have the time to do that too, right? And I really want to also just in this forum give a big thank you to Glenn Fox from UC Davis for actually letting me drop off samples of wort to him that were post mash. I think I did 12 different methods in that test. And these are with not that many grains, right? So, but it still helped to really anything at this point really helps, because I think one of the things that's tough about reading those papers from Zarnkow or Souls, as in from Grouse, or from Ledley, is that only one of those 3 actually performed those tests in an actual brewing environment, right? And that's, I think, one of the things that we really lack so much in this space is we have literally this forum has literally been that place where we can trade these notes, right? And at an academic level, at the very least, I think that is one of maybe the barriers of entry that we've had, is the fact that there is very little scientific understanding, and therefore some of these larger brew houses aren't willing to take that risk. And that's where I think things got derailed with the gluten reduced bullshit.
Yeah, that's a great segue to a question that I had about the publisher. And I know early on when we had some discussions about the book, there was a mention of, and I don't know what actually happened, so you can tell me now. So whether it was going to be purely focused on dedicated gluten-free brewing, or if they said to you, hey, Bob, we really want you to do a book that also touches on gluten reduced, and I don't know how you feel about that, or whether that was the case. So is this book purely dedicated gluten-free brewing? Do you touch on gluten reduced and the pros and cons and all that kind of stuff? What's the scoop on that?
Since this book is being published domestically, I felt the need to adhere to the legal requirements when it came to actually labeling something gluten-free. And I had that discussion ad nauseum with the Brewers Publications. It got to the point where I had to use something that the former brewer from Evasion had mentioned to me, and I kind of kept it in my back pocket. It took about 3 months to crack them, but because what I had done is I had just gone down the gluten-free rabbit hole mostly in the book at that point, from outlining to various different excerpts. We were, kind of like, hey, here's a passage, this and that. And she's like, I don't see any gluten reduced recipes in this book. And I go, well, what do you want? Like 9 pounds of two-row and throw some clarity firm at it? And she's like, wait, that's it? And I was like, oh man, I wish I would have said this sooner. Because that's the thing, is it's like, the way that I said it is like, there really isn't much nuance to gluten reduced, right? Essentially, you could in theory just buy the average the average gluten book, I guess, if I mean to say it, right? Like the average barley book already has all this stuff that you could do with a gluten reduced recipe. And that's really, in essence, the only process that it's undergoing is this. And I think that also through the way that the iterations of some of the chapters really came around, I think it really helps tell that story of, hey, yeah, no, there is like literally could be volumes of books just written on this one chapter, right? Specifically because we really don't know that much about it. And that's where the cool thing about gluten-free brewing really is the fact that this is very much uncharted waters, right? You have to go further back than most barley brewing to even understand it, right? A lot of these techniques that are being performed, like the overnight, holding the mash, like we've seen people in the group do it. We see people in ancient Africa and certain cultures doing this, where you're not just using the enzymes that are in the grain, which is a thing that is happening, but also when you get into those limiting points where you don't have the high enough activity of certain specific enzymes, the inclusion of the flora and fauna on the actual grains themselves that is being used in these ancient African techniques is creating a more fermentable wort by the inclusion of that wild bacteria or yeast that is, helping make that beer, right? So I think there are some of those things that end up being a fun discussion in this book, where it's like, yeah, there's a lot of ancient techniques that go into these grains, but hey, here's how we've been able to work through the limitations per se and really make them advantages within these grains, right? Because certain gluten-free grains are actually immune to certain things that barley is actually more prone to. It just really depends on the grain, right? So, and that also becomes a discussion, right? Because teff, historically in the gluten-free brewing community has been a grain to stay away from, right? You kind of brought that up earlier, in terms of the fact that people are talking about teff quite a bit right now. And I would actually, like to thank Ledley for that. Really, I don't think we would be talking about teff right now unless we had investigated its beta amylase content and activity in a gluten-free, mash. I was actually very impressed by that, right? I think that there were some people who have found fault with the university and their attempts at a patent, if you will. But in terms of the actual, educational value of that specific paper, I mean, like, what a godsend. And that's one of the reasons why I had to push back the actual, turning in, if you will, of certain chapters, is because it's like, whoa, this research right here just turns almost half this book on its head, right? And so that's where we have to go a little bit deeper, right? And there are certain assumptions that end up getting made, but then when we look at actual research that we're doing, that's where we've seen like gluten-free homebrewing specifically change some of their recipe kits with the inclusion of new enzymes and techniques, right? It used to be like a 15 to 16 pound grain pill for some of these to get like a 1050 starting gravity. And now that same would get you like at least 1080 or 1.1 if you do a first runnings. So I think that we've seen just like in the last, 4 years alone, we've seen just a massive, like in terms of knowledge, understanding, ability to get started, all those other things, right? And so I think, not just is the book a summation of those things, but it's also an opportunity where I chose to talk in certain sections about some of these newer concepts, or about some of these elements of what is packed away in these grains? How do we actually investigate that? How do we get more out of each grain itself and understand what and why we're doing what?
Excellent. Anyone got any questions for Bob? Questions out there from the I got more.
Yeah, let's go. I'm into it. I'm into it. Thank you. No, let me know if I'm getting like too much into the weeds. I'm trying to also be a little bit high level so that there is still value in buying the book or having it.
Yeah, don't give away all your secrets.
I can't. No, I
meeting.
can't.
Come on,
dude. Honestly, I don't think I have enough time even in this hour to get into it. It took multiple days to read the final copy, just for myself.
Kim, did you have a question? No.
I have one actually.
Oh, okay.
Awesome.
Yeah, so the book, is it kind of laid out more for, I don't know, like an intermediate to advanced gluten-free home brewer, or is this gonna hold somebody's hand? Like if I got a buddy who wants to get into it, I can go just like the How to Brew book, oh, here, this is gonna get you on the right track and get you to understand and how to make a more fermentable wort, but at a basic level as well.
True. I mean, I have some asides that are like those gray boxes that you see in certain like research papers where it talks about, I have a getting started section in terms of just even selecting the right brew house for yourself. It might be based on how large of your living space there is or your electrical capabilities or other things like that. So there's just certain things like that. Also like just like mash tun size, ideally for certain types of what you want to do. There also is just kind of like hey, if you're getting analysis paralysis, don't necessarily need to get too far in the weeds with me, get something going. And then once you've got a couple of successful ferments under your belt, maybe come back to some of these sections so that you can then take that next step forward. Right. So, we do get into a little bit of extract brewing, which I think is the best way to start if you're a gluten-free brewer or a brewer in general. But I think that even when you do that in barley, on the barley side, you'll notice that there is always something that could be lacking. And that's where incorporating different techniques, the partial mashes, the other stuff like that. So we do have a little bit of a discussion in there. I would say that there is enough definitions of specific things that you could be a complete beginner. But I would also say that this is really a companion to specifically gluten-free brewing, right? So that's where, maybe not even learning some of the sacred cows in barley would actually be an advantage, right? Because, I think that was something that was really interesting, and at least in my journey of gluten-free brewing, right? I remember an article that I read in Zymergy that had been actually contributed by Gluten-Free Home Brewing, where they suggested a 2-hour mash at 150 with like 20 pounds of Palin biscuit rice. So I think it was 10 and 10 of each. And I literally what? 150 with rice? I don't know if that's the best suggestion. For the average barley brewer, that's approachable, but I don't think that's the best technique, right? And it's just so interesting, right? Because there's so many discussions, because what works for one brewer could potentially not work for another brewer, right? And that's, I think, another thing that's really interesting about being a beginner is that I give very much credence to the fact that there really isn't actually a consensus in our space. And that's necessitated by the grains themselves. So that's where, I would say that, yes, definitely give this to any brewer you choose. But, sometimes it might be also be a good resource to have the wiki page for zero tolerance, which I think is also a really good companion. And that's where there was also this element for me where I was like, okay, a lot of this space is what I would call public domain, at least for us, right? Most of us don't necessarily need a book to get started because there hasn't been one, and I think it is great that we have one. So, but at the same point, I wouldn't necessarily say it's the Bible, because of the fact that what's true in 2022 could very well be not true in 2026, because of the fact that what was true in 2018 wasn't necessarily true in 2022, right? And so that's, I think, where a lot of these things are starting to really change a lot, because we are spending so much time researching these things now. And that so much time is all the massive amounts of if you could have access to breweries, brew books, I mean, that would be a gold mine right now, because that's the data we lack, right? Is that large scale, but also incorporating that in with zero tolerance. I actually used some of the survey data, the raw data at least, from some of the zero tolerance polls to help create inferences in the book, right? But that's like literally however many people responded out of what now 1,800. It's like what probably I was going to say maybe 82 people, which is really good. It's a really good population size for that level. But at the same point, you know, I would love to see better participation in these because it's going to inform so many more decisions, right? And it's not just from a cost saving standpoint. This is really about so much more than that, right? Just, you know, not just the education, but just the fact that like every time we do another one of these studies, every time we do another one of these surveys, we make this its own space that can't be taken away from us, right? That's, I think, the coolest thing, right? Is that you have brewers in other nations that, and domestically, that are buying seed and growing their own grains and then malting them and then roasting them and then brewing with them. Like, oh my gosh, right? Like that's amazing. That's not just like even being a part of something that's just like on the verge, but like you're literally like, we are literally in essence, not just figuratively, but literally planting seeds in this space. That's how much it means to people, right? It's just amazing. And that's, I think, something that's really so cool is to also represent that in this book as well.
Question on, you touched on some mention of different sections and things like that. So from a structure perspective, how is the book structured? Like just from a super high level, do you have just certain like big, larger sections that you've created? How does it look from a structure perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things that's tough is that I knew that there was going to be a lot of zero tolerance readership, but I also figured that there was also going to be a lot of not zero tolerance readership, as it were. And so, you know, I took a lot of inspiration from a lot of the club meetings that we've had over the years and tried to synthesize those into, okay, that really makes sense. Like, okay, cool. Here, what is gluten free, right? Let's start there. What is gluten? Right? Like so many people don't even know what it is. They're like, oh yeah, so you don't put any hops in it, right? What? You know, some of those where you're like, oh, okay, I guess we do need to start maybe like close to square one or like at least maybe a step past square one, but just like really lay down some bases real quick, just so that like somebody isn't in chapter 3 going like, wait, gluten's in barley? Oh no. Oh no. Been having barley bread for the last 15 years, right? You know, you don't want to have like that, right? Because like that is one of the things that I saw in an Instagram forum, right? Somebody was drinking Guinness and going, oh man, this is the best gluten-free beer out there. And I was like, wait, what? No, it's not gluten-free. Like you're gonna hurt yourself. No. And he's like, yeah, it has hoardine. And I'm like, that is gluten. Like, so yeah, in that way, I felt like, okay, yeah, let's get our bases covered. You know, let's establish what actually separates it. But then let's also talk about, okay, access, choice, style considerations, as well as once you actually have done all that, how do I actually make the beer? Right? Because I mean, we can talk about all the knowledge in the world, but at the same point, are we drinking beer? You know, because I'd say that's probably the most important thing of all of this. But let's be real. You know, and that's where it's like, you know, I think one of the things that's so cool is to have been involved and like have like a relatively engaged group of people, right? I think that's one of the things that's really cool about gluten-free people is that we're already used to making a stir at any restaurant we go to. So we're willing to like give propers or like ask questions, just be sure. And so like I fielded a lot of emails like when we first started, like not just questions about calories and stuff that I didn't actually truly know because we haven't sent it off to lab yet, but just like, oh, you know, how do we make it? Or, oh, you know, hey, this is really special. This reminds me of this beer. And I started to just think about that, right? Is like, oh yeah, like that's really informed a lot of recipes that I put in the book. But I think I also kind of like guided certain brewers that were like, hey, I have like all these recipes. Which one should I actually give you? And it's like, no, actually give me your like 2 or 3 of your most basic recipes, right? The recipes that are simple and clean and remind you of one of your favorite beers, right? That was really cool. Oh my gosh, to see the recipes that got given out. I mean, I'd like to give a special thanks to a couple breweries specifically that gave me recipes of their flagships. Like, that's a big deal. That's like a really big deal. Like, those are like worth potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars, those beers alone, right? Some of them are probably have grossed probably more than that, right? Which is really freaking special, right? And so that's, I think, something that is really cool, is that the gluten-free brewing community itself, or just the gluten-free people, right? That's, you know, let's start at a higher level, right? The just offering, you know, just, yeah, here, have this. This is a really special recipe to me. And this is one of my favorite beers I've ever made. Here, you're like, and it's not just to me, right? I know that a part of it came from, you know, my relationship with these people, which is really special to me. But to see that in a more global context, right? That they wish to share that with the world, right? That's moving, you know? And that's what I hope this book really helps represent for people that are either in this group or have never even thought that there was this group, right? Because you wouldn't believe how many people that have reached out to our brand who have given up, who had given up on like beer. What? You know, it's like, it's such a silly concept, because when, you know, we make fun of college kids for being done with beer, but I missed being done with beer too, right? And that's one of the things that's so special to me, is like to not have to worry about it. And that's one of the things that I think really, you know, really made this book special to me, is to really go like, hey, here we go, here it is, right? Here's the way to reclaim an otherwise off limits beverage. Here, let's do this. Let's take it back, you know? And that's so special. And I really appreciate your help, Kale, and Stuart's help on chapter 1 alone. Just that ability to help synthesize what I was trying to say, because I have a tendency, I am sure one or two of you have seen this, where I have a tendency to be a little militant at times, as one of my copy editors described me. And so the ability to really help find that voice, you know, is something that I really appreciate, because that's really what it was. Is it really wasn't me writing this book. And I hope that I've been able to describe or express that in, you know, through my answering of these questions, is that it really was not me, and it really was the Gluten Free Brewing community. And it was just me really hoping package that, right, in the words and the word choices that I used in this book. And that really came very much from this book, from this group, from the Zero Tolerance group.
Did you, I think you already touched on one of my other questions. So, yeah, so when you pitched this original, like, you had an original, I'm sure, vision of what this was going to look like, right? And I'm guessing that along the way that original vision transformed itself into what we're going to see September 26th when the book gets released, and people can buy it at every place that we saw listed on Brewers Publications website. So what was that process like, and evolving from what your original idea was, and then throughout the writing and editing process? I'm sure it was a long journey. Like, what was that like? Was that like pleasant, frustrating, all sorts of different emotions depending on the day? Like, how did that? What was that like?
Well, I mean, I think it was really tough because you know, when I introduced the subject to Brewers Publications, it was 2019, right? So a lot's changed, right? And a lot had changed from 2019 to 2020 when we signed the contract, right? And that had started through, like, you know, really, and I would really like to give a lot of credit to that from Joe Morris, really. You know what I mean? He's the one who really put this all on the radar for Brewers Association, which Brewers Association was actually the organization that connected us to, because simultaneous to the fact that he had tried to start this club, or was starting this club with the Brewers Association, the Zero Tolerance Gluten Free Homebrewing Club, I had also put in for a seminar on gluten free brewing, and this was really just sharing like, oh hey, yeah, this is what I've learned, and you know, it also was very much inspired by a lot of what Gluten Free Homebrewing had done at that point, the website, and so it was really just kind of a thought to further that, but also to, you know, get it in with an organization that is not just reputable, but known and loved, right? And so that's where a lot of that started, right? Is okay, let's do it in these public forums. Let's get the word out there. Let's start the education process. And then it really was kind of like, you know, they followed up, and I had kind of reached out. They were like, hey, can we get a potential outline from you? And so, you know, I'd say that outline from the original outset to where it is now, I am actually curious if it even looks anything close to what it does now, right? Because there was a lot of like the basics, but then like there was also like certain sections where it was like deep in the gluten-free weeds, right? And that was great, but then we had to kind of like work through some of that, work, you know, like kind of add in sections. Some of these were more asides. Some of these were stuff that hasn't really actually been codified because it hasn't been peer reviewed, right? So there was a lot of things that were either like, okay, well, we've got to like transition it to be more of a discussion than really truly fact. And so that's really kind of what changed some of the context. But also another thing that was really frustrating was the fact that like literally in the time when I first wrote one of the chapters, I think we added like, but I started writing it in like 2020 or maybe early 2021. And then, you know, not just Grouse, but Eckert also, like, if you combined all the malts that got released in between the time when I started talking about this, that we added like 10 to 20 new malts and subtracted like 2 or 3, right? So it's like some of these chapters started off as one thing, and then through updates in just the industry alone completely changed, because it's like, oh wow, okay, well this totally changes like how I would craft this recipe too, right? Which is like oh okay, I have more access to this flavor now, or I have an easier medium through which to create this color, right? Specifically, that changes how I think about creating an amber, or that changes how I think about creating a dunkel or a Weissbier, right? Like all those different recipes and flavor contributions that when you actually start breaking down some of the style guidelines, which is what this book caused me to go through as well, you really start to go, oh, okay, wow, I think some of these grains actually nail these flavors more spot on than even barley. But I will say that over time, every year that passes, my palate gets less and less attuned to barley. But, you know, there is still a lot of those flavors that, you know, are naturally elicited or can be coaxed out of gluten-free grains. But that's really only when we're looking at the quote unquote, is there a substitute question? You know, there's a lot of different ways to have that discussion. And I really like the way that the discussion ended up through multiple iterations. But I really do like the place that it is right now. And I really do feel like this book, you know, is not just a, you know, getting started or as a how-to, but also a really great jumping off point. Specifically because there are, you know, a couple takes on some classic styles that don't actually even involve the modern malt catalog that we have, right? That involves some stuff like Amaranth, right? From Miguel Toban, who I believe is in Colombia. So there's some really cool elements where, you know, we're literally just like, I wanted to show that fact that, hey, here's what we've done domestically, but also, hey, look, check out what's happening internationally, because I think that's really where the space has the most opportunity to get like thrown into the stratosphere, right? You think about the brands like say in like Australia and New Zealand or whatever. So I think it's mostly Australia at this point still, but like they're buying like shipping containers full of grouse malt, right? Like that's thousands and thousands of pounds, right? Just to try to help with the price of their beer. Well, what would happen if that went and got grown domestically, right? That changes the entire game for brewers. And that's, I think, where it's like, we really are so lucky that our nation saw through the kind of going, wait a minute, that sounds like snake oil, when it came to putting a chemical in barley to quote unquote make it gluten free, is that they helped codify those labeling practices like almost a decade ago now at this point, which is really one of the things that made the this space grow. Also a 2006 law, which is what helped spawn Redbridge and actual lakefront New Grist. And that's, I think, one of the things that's really cool is to see like those are like, I would say like those timepieces, right? Those like markers, right? That then we kind of start like going like, oh, okay. And then here was the next iteration. And then like 10 years later, here we are now, right? It's like, it's really cool to see that history and to have kind of like been able to hopefully, you know, at least at a high level represent that so that people can really understand where we really are with this space.
Anyone, any questions, other questions for Bob, Kim, Casey, anything on your mind?
It's been a little dense, so I appreciate you guys letting me ramble on for a little bit. So yeah, I know, thank you. You know,
It's
whatever
great.
questions you have, I'm definitely willing to answer them.
So one thing that this is probably my last kind of question, I think, and it's around a lot of stuff that you talked about, you know, just even what you just mentioned about, you know, the labeling laws and so on and so forth. And, you know, I began my brewing odyssey in gluten free at the end of 2017, so it's not been that long, but I guess it's kind of an eternity in the dedicated gluten free brewing space, and a lot has changed just even in that you know, 4 or 5 years, right? And the things you're talking about with the malt houses and the different malts that have come out, the different enzymes that people use, the kind of knowledge base that's grown over time. So it's interesting you were saying these things about how, oh, I had to rewrite these sections of this book, and you could probably do that eternally, right? So you could probably eternally go back a year from now and say, oh yeah, this section, oh man, that that's not right. So what my question would be around, like, do you see at some point, like 5-10 years from now, a version 2 where you go back and you relook at and you rewrite and revise and say, hey, because I know that's been done with multiple different brewing books, and it seems like for this topic specifically, I'm sure you look at this 10 years from now, you'd be like, oh, this definitely needs a version 2. So I know you haven't even released the first one, so this is a little bit of thinking towards the future, but
True. Well, I got to a point where I had to say at the time of writing,
yeah.
Right. I had to do that in multiple sections in the book, and I hope that people get a nice little chuckle out of that, because, you know, that is true. You know, it literally could be 6 months from now, where so a lot of stuff I'm saying in this book could be potentially a myth now, or hey, yeah, that's the way it used to be, bro.
Oops, sorry.
Ayo. But yeah, no, I think that one of the things that I would like to do in the future is kind of something that Casey actually alluded to a little bit earlier in our discussion, which is like, I really would love to have like a gluten-free brewing 101 that is like the complete joy of home brewing, or, you know, how to brew, which is, I think, probably going to be needed at a certain point in the, because as you mentioned, right, like, yeah, it was actually a lot of work going through various discussions in the Zero Tolerance Club. And it's not really anything, it's just the nature of the beast. That's how Facebook works, right? Is that it is very like now, in the now, right? So you either got to remember really well, or you have to have the ability to search out really well, because it's not like an actual like SQL database where you can just like make queries to oh, hey, remember the time we had that random discussion about this? Yeah, so yeah, I think that it will become a helpful thing, you know, very soon, because of the fact that, you know, Zero Tolerance is now in its kind of like, it's maturing as a group, right? So most of the questions, yeah, you'll get the average like, hey, I've never brewed before, but you'll also get like hey, I did a 135 rest instead of a 125. And I noticed this, right? Which the average new brewer is gonna like, eyes are gonna glaze over and they're gonna like keep scrolling, if you will, which is fair, right? And that's where having something like a getting started and then advanced gluten-free brewing techniques, or, you know, like diverging, right? Because I'm starting to see at scale, things are a little different. The mash behaves differently. The grains sometimes behave differently. And that some of those concerns aren't an issue at the homebrewer level, right? And so that's where you do sometimes have in barley, not as much, but you know, when you go to like local homebrew club meetings like I used to do, and then you listen to some of these professional brewers talk about what they do, you go, that's different. Because they don't say to do that in the barley world, like in the brew books or like the homebrew club meetings that I've been to, which is all talking about the homebrew stuff. When you talk about like the commercial scale, there's things like contact times, which are like really short. Like, you know, your average barley mash, right? I'm sure many of us that are in this call know that it's, you know, a 1 hour at 150, right? Kind of like easy. But they don't necessarily do that at that scale, right? In the same way that we do things sometimes differently at scale. And that's been kind of that's what made the journey of going from a home brewer to pro brewer. It made it really interesting, but it also kind of like really kind of like helped to feed into this element that I don't think we can have a consensus, right? You know, I spend a lot of my time talking to home brewers, but I also spend a lot of my time talking to pro brewers, right? And that's where the whole warm Weinheim-Steffener came from, which is a fun discussion, right? Like, I had Dave walk into my shed one day, and he goes, "Wait, you just have carboys like scattered around like at room temperature, like what?" And I was like, "Yeah, I don't really care about that stuff anymore. You know what I mean?" And he was like, "What?" And so it's like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it could be one of those things where, you know, that the whole gluten-free malts are sometimes immune to certain things that barley has a tendency towards, but also have higher propensity to things that barley doesn't have a high propensity towards. Like we talk about like the wintergreen or celery and rice, right? Rice also has a really high ferulic acid content. And you can still hear me, right? I had a notification come up. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And so like, it's basically on the list, it's like corn, wheat, and then rice, right? And I wonder if there is this element of the ferulic acid in, say, like the bran in rice that could be leading into some of these, if not treated properly, right? If not doing the correct rest with the grain, right? And that's still stuff that like, there was no time whatsoever to get into those sorts of discussions, right? So that's where I think that having that advanced copy would be, I think, something that would be really fun, but then would also necessitate like potentially a research grant, which I think is something that I'm really excited about that at this point. And I think it would really help, you know, not just the home brewing space, but I think it would really help the commercial brewing space. Is that, you know, at a certain point I gave up, you know, seeing other brands as competitors, really as more of like a, you know, when I taste a beer that's either expired or, you know, say it's within the range, but still doesn't taste what I'm looking for in a beer, I want to reach out to that brewery and ask them, like, as a home brewer, like millions and millions of questions, right? Where did you get your malt? How did you brew it? What temperature did you ferment? What yeast did you use? Literally everything that's like all trade secrets, right? And so I think that was something that was really interesting, is that some brands didn't even like respond. Like brands that we like know and love. And I don't want to name names because I don't want to be that guy, but I was surprised at some of the brands that didn't participate in this book, right? That blew the lid off for me. Not just from an emotional standpoint, but just from like, oh wait, am I doing the right thing? Right? Because I run a brand. Should I be giving this all away? Right? Like,
Right.
What does happen if an Anheuser-Busch Redbridge makes a better version of its beer and then people don't buy better craft beer, right? Which is oftentimes what happens with macro beers, right? There's people that are not having craft beers, sometimes because of the price, And that is a concern because they're missing out on some really great beers out there. And that's where I think you see this massive voice in the craft brewing space, in the home brewing space, and in other spaces where they really are really sticking their neck out there to be more noticeable to the average beer consumer, right? I was just in Las Vegas recently because I was on a bucket list trip with my dad to the Colorado River, which was world changing for me. To be 7 days out in the desert with no tent and sleeping under the stars every night, that is a thing. But anyways, you go into Vegas and you see these like lineups of these tall cans, and like, some of these brands are trying to be relevant, and then some of these are doing a really good job. Like, hey, big shout out to Sierra Nevada, like playing with the big boys and actually doing a really good job. But that is one of the things that is tough, is that like, is this giving the keys to the castle away? I don't think so. And that's, I think, the fact that this space is still so new. That it's like, honestly, in brewing, it's really all about execution. You know what I mean? You can have the best recipe, you have the best brewers, but if you don't execute well at every single step in that process, you might not necessarily have that beer that you set out to make. And that is another discussion in the book, in terms of like, hey, a beer by any other name would sound just as sweet, right? But we do have to sometimes do a better job of codifying and describing the style that we're putting in packaging, because I think that is potentially something that has caused this feeling of, oh, gluten-free has a taste, right? Which I'm thinking most of these people are tasting off flavors, but not actually tasting the beer that was set out to be made, because they wouldn't put, swill in a can. They're putting their heart and soul in that can. You know what I mean?
I think like the maybe going back before, like maybe say 10 years ago, like a gluten-free beer taste to me would mean like sorghum twang. That's what I would equate to someone's idea of what a gluten-free beer would taste like, right?
Fair.
Which is, no,
the
not
quasi
that's
malty bitter.
yeah.
And that's, I think, tough, right? I mean, I wouldn't say it's a stigma anymore. But getting started, there was this kind of like stigma, right? Like, there's a word that we use in English, and it's a good describing word. If I'm not mistaken, I believe it might be an adverb, but I'm not an English major, so don't quote me on that. And that word is called actually. Now, I know everybody's thinking about Hugh Grant now, but the word actually is a really mean word to use when you're setting out to make a good beer. And somebody goes, oh, this is actually good. You're like,
This doesn't suck.
yeah, oh, thanks. Thanks. And so, yeah, that's, I think, what one of the discussions that I went and talked about in the book was, what is a world-class beer? Really, what is a world-class beer? Right? Because, like, especially when you look at like certain categories, right? I think Jason brings this up a lot, right? Where it's like, how do you compare a Saison to an IPA? I don't know how you do that, right? And I definitely give a lot of credence to the effort that goes into being a beer judge, right? It's actually a really tough job, and in certain kind of contexts, it can be thankless, because there's people putting their ego on the line, not just their brand, and so I think that there is a lot of that too. But also I think that there was a discussion that we ended up kind of removing from the book, but it is something that I've brought up in some of the forums on this group, which are, if you look at the actual results from, I think this is more than 1 year in the gluten-free brewing space, you've had like as many as 50 entrants, or maybe like something in the 40s, 40 to 50 entrants, which is actually a lot. You know what I mean? When you think about it, brand-wise, like, in the gluten-free category at a large competition, you can't enter more than one beer in that category, right? So when you have 45 entries, that's actually really freaking impressive, right? Because we have dedicated spaces, but then we have, the places that are non-dedicated but are still making gluten-free products, which are allowed in that category. But then you'll also see stuff like only 2 medals given, And that's not because like something happened and like something was off. That means that 43 out of 45 had some clear flaw that they couldn't even be given a bronze. Right? What is that? Like we need to unpack that. We need to speak to every single one of those judges and like pull all that data out of their brain, right? Because like, where did they actually miss the mark? Did they call it a wit when it should have been a Hefeweizen? Did they call it Belgian when it should have been a French style? Like, what really was the problem? Like, or was it just that god awful? Like, no, there's no way it was that god awful. You know what I'm saying? Like, and I think that's something that that's where we're missing some of those very, very important data points. And that's what I hope that this book will hopefully one day kind of bring about, is really a better understanding of what is somebody who can have barley when they drink a gluten-free beer that maybe does have an off flavor or doesn't. What does that mean, right? Like, what does an off flavor mean if we're not using barley? Does that mean that everything is an off flavor if we're not using barley? Maybe. But is that worth it? Is that worth calling it an off flavor at that point? Because it's a different grain.
Right. Exactly. This is great. Thank you. We've dwindled to just 3 of us now. So
I know.
So it's not. I think it's just they
were logging off to buy it, and then they couldn't get back in. They were logging off to buy the book.
Everyone is like frantically going over to Amazon and wherever to pre-order their copies right now. So,
truth. There you go.
So just to kind of sum it up, I think we've kind of gone over our time, but thank you so much for coming on, and thanks Casey for sticking around all the way to the end. Holy cow, what a freaking trooper. Nice.
There you go.
My first meeting, so I had to stay.
Smart. There you go.
Thank you so much for joining your first meeting, and you stuck it out all the way to the end. So thankful for that. That's awesome.
There we go. We did it. We made it to the end. We all 3 of us could at least handle my rambling, so that's good.
That's right. That means we all get extra beer tonight. All those other people, no beer for them tonight.
So true. You know what you guys deserve? Another beer.
And actually, this is completely like not even part of this conversation, but I was IMing with JP Beerley, and he's like, "Did you know that we distribute into Washington now?" I was like, "You didn't freaking tell me that you distribute." And he's like, "Yeah, we're at the Total Wine just right down the street from your house." And so
yeah, he's been busy logging the miles. Apparently he's been sleeping in the cargo van, which I'm like, JP, just get a hotel, bro. They're not that expensive. That guy's dedicated, man. I'm like, dude, this guy is a superhuman.
Yeah, superhuman.
It comes with the last name, I feel like, Beer Lee. Everything he does is beer.
It's always all beer all the time.
Yeah.
So Casey, since this is your first meeting, any last questions? Anything was this a good discussion? How'd you feel about it?
I think it's a great discussion. Excuse me. I've only been brewing gluten-free for about a year or so. So just kind of crawling. I was a barley beer brewer for 10 years or something like that. So
okay,
it's very different.
Right.
Having to juggle different types of grain. And I'm in California, in San Jose area.
Oh, nice.
But I grew up in Orange County, man. So I'm right there with you in Tustin. But just getting my hands on product is so tough. Up until I walked into the Bevmo and I saw Divine Science, beer. Yeah, that and Glutenberg, that was the only 2,
Fair.
And so, even getting good commercial examples, I went up to Oregon to I drove my truck up and bought like 100 pounds of grain.
Oh, to Ashland? You went up to?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Nice.
That's awesome.
Wow.
That's a long drive from San Jose. It's like, what, 10 hours?
Jeez.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, a little less than that because it's on the border. So.
Oh, for sure.
But Portland's 10.5 hours. So, but I'll be doing that again because I'm almost out of grain. I can only drink it so fast. So, but that's the other thing too, is like when I was drinking, you know, barley beer, like guys come over and have a few beers, but people kind of turn their nose up to the gluten free. So it's hard for me to kick off my training wheels because I'm only doing brews
Right.
every 3-4 months. It's like,
Right.
what was I doing again? You know, and
Yeah.
I'm not the best note taker. So to have something that's laid out, you know, and you know, a club that actually kind of help us out and stuff, that's really good. You know, one thing I'd like to see on the zero tolerance, and I know there's been some podcasts out there. Jason from Mutantis did one. I guess it didn't get recorded, and I actually emailed him, and he emailed me right back, and he said he might have actually had one um, with you at Divine Science, maybe
Yeah.
on your brother's. Yeah, but I can't find it on the web.
Yeah, it's on Instagram. So you would have to follow my wife's Instagram, which is at Gluten Free Dominique with a C, DOMONIC. She might even just pop up when you like Gluten Free Dom. You'll probably find it once you like click that. Yeah, we had him. We've had. I don't know if we've actually had Beerly yet. We need to have Beerly, but we've done Ghostfish. We've done Moon Shrimp, which was a little bit more of us tasting beers and then him commenting in the comments, the same way that it was with the Columbus, Ohio brewery with they've got some really good, and they don't use enzymes, right? So there's some interesting beers that they make. We had Evasion on, I think once or twice, because we did a low ABV evasion episode and then we did a high ABV evasion episode, which is really tough to get through the high ABV one. Yeah. Oh my gosh, dude, like 12% beers.
Is that like grandpa's nap? Don't drink too much of that.
No, dude, we were like I was like, yeah, let's not use large glasses for this episode.
Yeah, use like little tiny shot glasses.
Yeah, I'm like, let's use the tasting glasses for this one. Oh my god, though, I was just still blasted after like 3 tasters, dude. We've had them, and then we've had Brian on once or twice from Gluten Free Brew Supply, and yeah, so we've done a couple. We've done on YouTube. You can follow Baking and Brewing GF at Baking and Brewing GF, and I've done a couple brewing episodes. She's done a couple baking episodes. We'll try to mix in some of those themes, and then we ended up getting more into like the tasting thing, and that's really where we went more of the Instagram platform and doing the live feature, because it's just so easy to just do it live and then boom, publish it. So that's really where we did that. I think we ended up having 1 or 2 that we like multi-recorded on the Facebook, but I'll be honest, I don't know if the Facebook quality was as good. So yeah, I mean, we've definitely tried to do that. I've been on Beersmith twice, but that was like 2 and 3 years ago. Or
yeah, I saw those too.
Yeah, so that was a little while back. So I'm hoping to get on there again. I'm probably going to end up doing some sort of like, Brewers Publications will actually be sending me some sort of like a media kit in the coming weeks. And I'll be doing some media training. And then I'll probably do the circuit, hopefully. Again, like just about every brewing podcast I can hope to get on, I hope to be on. So that'll be fun. And now that we've hired a couple beer staff, for pouring beer in the tap room, I might be able to make it out to the 31st club meeting. We're working on it. I'm gonna see if I can do it, because that would be really fun, just to be around everybody, but also to like get a chance to try some stuff, or maybe have some people be on the show. Like we did have Mutantis on the show, but we really only got to try like 4 or 5 of their beers, and they make like so many. So it would be really cool to like, actually like do a full cycle, or do like a, just a like 4 gluten-free lagers episode, and then like 4 gluten-free pale ales episode, right? Something that where you can actually like, instead of like just doing the flight from one brand, incorporate multiple brands, and then start talking about that and breaking it down. Because I think that would be really cool, because like that, not to plug the book anymore, but per se, like that is another thing that I talk about, right? Is like, how do you judge a category that could have literally 8 different iterations and they wouldn't even have used the same grain of one beer style, right? It's like, it's a conundrum, right? Like that's not even a problem in, any other category, right? And so I think that's something that, is really cool and unique about us. So I think that's what we hope to show more of. And yeah, hopefully now that we've started to add, more to the brand, and, we've started to kind of become a little bit more self-sufficient as a brand, that we can start, getting back into investing in the community, which is something that's always going to be a soft spot for me. Is that's where I came from, right? Those are my roots, right? So it's really hard to, not just from a mentality standpoint, break out of that, but also just like that's still where I want to spend most of my time. Is that's where the innovation's happening, right? Is like, you see these people doing a lot of clones, but now we're starting to like push past the clone, which I think is something that's really cool, right? Not just making ancient styles, but making like just a completely different style. Like that I feel like something is going to be so important to come in the coming years, is like,
Yeah.
what is this beer made with this grain versus this beer made with this grain?
That's what I've been pushing for the last couple of years. I think I've said this on numerous occasions. What if there was this style that was, an American millet beer,
Millet time.
yeah, right, exactly. There's various iterations of that. I agree with you that there is at some point going to be a evolution of our community, and there's going to be these things that maybe we look back on a long time from now and say, oh wow, that was like the start of when we created this whole new style of beer that is something that maybe it came from an attempt to emulate some other barley beer or something like that, but it just became its own kind of thing, right? So I think there's definitely space for that. And I know a lot of people want to emulate their favorite barley beers from what they had in a previous life, if they can no longer drink that. But to me, I think that's really cool to have that opportunity to be a part of the creation of those things, right? Which I think it's so it's such a new thing. I know these grains have been around forever, and people have been brewing with them for a long time, but with what we've kind of seen in North America, it's like it's really a new thing, right? So
yeah. Well, like you have the West Coast IPA, you have the New England IPA now, and now you're starting to see the West Coast hazy IPA start to like kind of like rear its head. And now I just saw on the shelf maybe a couple days ago a San Diego style IPA. Because there's a Pacific Northwest style IPA, I guess. I'm like, we're starting to like bifurcate even like long-standing traditions of like what a West Coast IPA is, right? Like gluten free is like way more than that. Like we've got like so many more grains to even think about, right? So there's just like,
right.
You're anybody that would assume, hey, this really feels like it's in its infancy would be 100% correct.
All right, I gotta cut it here because my wife is gonna murder me if I don't get off Zoom and go do something.
She must be talking to my wife.
Yeah. Right?
Casey, it was great to have you on this meeting. Thanks for joining. And look forward to having you on future meetings. Hopefully you can make up to the party. If not, I'm sure we'll see you on the Facebook page. And Bob, again, thanks so much for joining and talking about the new book. Of course, the new book is Gluten Free Brewing. If anyone's stuck around and watching this on YouTube, congratulations to you. Holy cow, this is a long one. And go out and buy the book, digital, print, pre-order, support this new book that's coming out. Thanks so much for your time, and I'm sure we'll talk again soon.
Looking forward to it. Thank you again.
All right, take care.
All right.